Madam, please start.
Sir, shall I start? Principal, sir?
Yes, start.
Okay. A very good afternoon to all. I extend my warm welcome to all of you to the fifth day of our 7 days international online lecture series and workshop on revisiting the history of India and beyond. It is my privilege to welcome Dr. Shamsuzzaman Ahmed, Principal Sripat Singh College, Dr. Navakumar Ghosh, Teacher in Charge, Jangipur College, and our esteemed resource persons of today, Professor Rashford Bosho from University of Calcutta and Professor Gulfisha Khan from Aligarh Muslim University, and my fellow colleagues, my dear students, and all the participants. And I hope all the participants are enjoying and are getting enriched by the deliberations so far. And I really believe that we have achieved a lot, and with the belief, with the hope that we will achieve the same in the coming days also. With this hope, I invite our revered principal, Dr. Shamsuzzaman Ahmed, to deliver the welcome address. Sir, over to you.
Sir, unmute, please, sir.
Sir, unmute yourself. It is muted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Very good afternoon. This is the fifth day of our program. Practically, we are at the fag end of the program, 7-day long program. Undoubtedly, it is a tedious job, but our joint team of Sripat Singh College and Jangipur College so far have done their job nicely, and that's why it became very enjoyable from all, particularly the participant. I most welcome today's resource person, Professor Rashford Bosho from Calcutta University. It is well known to us that our college initially was affiliated to Calcutta University, and in the 2002, the year I became the principal, 19th session of All Bengal Itihas Parishad's seminar was held at our college, and a lot of historians, including late Vasudev Chattopadhyay, now Vice Chancellor of Jadavpur University Suranjan Das, at that moment, so far I remember, Sam Sarkar Madhumi was the secretary, Ramkrishna Chattopadhyay, that is stalwart of the history area, attended this program. Another resource person is from Aligarh University, and there is a close connection with Aligarh University, and the anchor or the announcer or the program maker, Emily Rumi herself, is the product of Aligarh University, and I personally visited many a times Aligarh University. Most probably the last journey I met legendary figure Irfan Habib, and Professor Gulfishan Khan attended a seminar at our college physically, and next time when I went to Aligarh, I visited her house. So the topic that will be the lecture delivered on which Gulfishan Khan is very interesting to me, at least. Exploration to the Mughal architects with special reference to Taj Mahal. So every Indian is known about Taj Mahal, and there are some now at present some debate raging, unfortunately. So everything will be covered by her, I think. With these few words, once again, I give my heartfelt thanks to the resource persons of today's and the participant. They are attending so long time this webinar, this series. So I expect their good health and sound mind so that they can be benefited from these lectures. With these few words, I once again request Emily to start with the resource persons.
Thank you, sir. Uh, I am really honored to announce that today we have two eminent historians amongst us, Professor Rashford Bosho from University of Calcutta and Professor Gulfishan Khan from Aligarh Muslim University. I am really grateful to them that they have accepted our invitation and they really made it possible to be with us. Thanks a lot to our esteemed resource person. So before I would go to the technical session 5, I would shortly introduce our first speaker, Professor Rashford Bosho. Though I think Professor Bosho does not need any introduction, as we all are enlightened and somewhere or anywhere we have been enriched by his talk. And I think he does not need any introduction, but I would not definitely miss this chance. Okay, so in very short, Dr. Rashford Bosho is presently a professor in the Department of History, University of Calcutta, and is internationally renowned for his research on the marginalized communities of South India. His areas of interest include modern Indian history, caste movement, history of medicine. His major publications include Nandana's Children, The Pariah's Tryst with Destiny, Tamil Nadu 1850 to 1956, Dalit Experiences in Colonial and Post-Colonial India. He has co-edited Medical Encounters in British India, Voices from the Margins, Aspects of Adivasi History in India, and Narratives of the Excluded, Caste Issues in Colonial India. He has published a number of papers in various reputed journals such as Studies in History, Indian Historical Review, Social Scientist, etc. And he has also published a large number of book chapters in edited book published by Anthem Press, Oxford University Press, Routledge, Cambridge Scholar Publishing, etc. Now I invite Professor Bosho to deliver his lecture, and he will be focusing on understanding the initial phase of industrialization in the United States in the early 19th century. Sir, welcome and be on our web desk.
A very good afternoon to you all. First of all, let me take the opportunity of thanking the hosts, in this case, Sripat Singh College and Jangipur College, for jointly hosting this webinar and that too for a long period of time, stretching over to roughly around a week or so. So this, we are almost towards the end of this long webinar, and today some of my former students whom I had taught in my younger days at the Rabindra Bharati University, and now who are faculty members in this college, I received a request from them, and I told them that it would be very difficult for me to actually, accept this invitation, given the fact that I am terribly preoccupied with teaching, and that too with online classes. So far as my postgraduate students are concerned, in my workplace, the University of Calcutta, and also too much laden with a lot of other academic work, which seems to be piling up day by day. Now, some of the other, they wouldn't leave me, and they said that I had to say something about Industrial Revolution, because as students they had heard me lecturing on Industrial Revolution. Now, for a teacher who has been in this field for about 3 decades, it's close to 3 decades that I've been teaching at the postgraduate level in different universities, not only here in West Bengal, but also in other parts of India and abroad for a fairly long period of time. It comes almost naturally that every university makes a demand on the faculty. And in my case, when I first started teaching at the postgraduate level, I had to take the burden, I had to shoulder the burden of actually teaching a part of the course on Industrial Revolution. And it has been years, decades, decades before that this sort of responsibility had been vested on me. And when this invitation came, I think I was in two minds, because I've not been teaching Industrial Revolution for a fairly long period of time, and I might be a bit rusted because of this inertia on my part so far as teaching a course on Industrial Revolution is concerned. But in between, I had been teaching a course on business history at the Indian Institute of Management at Kozhikode. And this was at the invitation of a very good friend of mine, Dr. Aparajit Ramnath. And I think while I was teaching this course, a lot of course pack came to me from the IIM Kozhikode, and at the same time, I had to do a lot of reference myself to actually make my students interested in this entire course on business history. And Aparajit was indisposed, he was ill, and he had to shift temporarily to Madras for medical aid. So the entire task of actually instructing the students on business history came on me, and it was it was a long series of 18 lectures, and then hopefully Aparajit came in for holding the examination. Now these students were all from engineering backgrounds, and there were only a few who were from economics backgrounds, and of course they were in a very premier business school. But the fact is that that particular 1 month in which I was very busy delivering all these lectures, it was far more enriching teaching the students of IIM Kozhikode, for the fact that because they did not have all this sort of fetishness of being historians or being would-be historians, and they were very much interested in history, and they would pose a lot of questions. Unlike our students, they would pose a lot of questions, because every half an hour, after one and a half hours, the last 30 minutes, we have a 2-hour slot. So the last 30 minutes are left for students to make observations, comments, and questions, and pose questions before the instructor of the course. And it was very, very enriching because I found a lot of people from IITs who were raising a lot of issues which normally doesn't come to you as a teacher when you are teaching postgraduate students in any department of history. But of course, they were from different backgrounds, and perhaps this sort of, you know, the sort of training that the sort of different academic training that they came from might have contributed to their own assessment about the lectures and about the sort of issues that historians often ponder about or should take up in the future. Now, I I'm basically I'll be today talking about the American textile industry, which actually provided much of the momentum to the later day industrialization in the US. And I'll be talking about the cotton textile industry because in the case of the US, we find that it was cotton initially in the early part of the 19th century, which had served as the sort of the leading sector. Now there is a lot of debate over this buzz that comes in when one teaches industrial revolution. Now, when there is a statement, I think in the 1980s when I was a student, and I was taught by very eminent teachers at the University of Calcutta, and we used to confront this dictum in class as postgraduate students. The dictum goes like this: whoever speaks of industrial revolution actually speaks of cotton. So actually you cannot really shy away yourself from a discussion of the cotton textile industry, and this has been talked about for a fairly long period of time by historians like Phyllis Dean, by Eric Hobsbawm, by several other people, Clement Cork, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a field which has been dominated by a lot of people, and my job here is to talk about the cotton textile industry in this early part of the 19th century. Now, nearly, as we all know, before the first modern factories, churning out machines or machine products came, the first modern factories essentially which emerged catered to the production of cotton textile. And as a nation industrializes, cotton manufacturing actually leads the way. This has been also true for countries like Mexico and India in the 20th century, as it was true for 18th century Britain, the first industrialized nation. Now, Britain had long been a major producer of hand-spun and hand-woven woolen yarn and cloth. In the last decades of the 18th century, a series of mechanical inventions made possible the production of cloth from raw cotton by water-powered and then steam-powered machines. Now, in the invention of these machines, not only set up the Industrial Revolution in Britain, but also had a very powerful impact across the Atlantic, because we all know that there are several economic historians who have talked about this flow of ideas from England across the Atlantic to America. So there is no fact denying that whatever was happening in England in course of the late 18th century, so far as the industrial sector was concerned, particularly the textile sector, was having an impact on the American economy. And especially the impact was felt on the Atlantic seaboard. I'm talking about particularly those states of America which have a coastline, in the sense that they share a common coastline, in the sense that they have a boundary with the Atlantic Ocean. And we find that in America, slowly and steadily, there was a very new demand for cotton which was gearing up. As a result, cotton also, this entire idea of growing cotton also emerged in the US, and particularly from 1786 onwards, we could find that cotton was grown commercially in the southern part of the United States. And after the invention of the cotton gin in 1793, it made it possible for the industries which were located in the Atlantic seaboard territory or in upland areas to actually utilize this cotton that was produced in the American South through the plantation system. And as a result, we find that more and more the sort of the industries in the Atlantic seaboard state, they tend to eat up the sort of cotton production. So there was an ever increasing demand for cotton which was coming in from the American industries in the Atlantic seaboard states. And we find that this was also having a great deal of impact on the American South. As we all know, that American South was actually the haven of the slavery, was actually the haven of the institution of slavery. The system of slavery actually was growing at a tremendous pace. And as a result, once we find that there was a demand for production of cotton, the slavery became more and more entrenched. Now, cotton textile industry also, we saw machinery. There was also a debate about the cotton textile machinery and the sort of this new cotton textile machinery that was being used in Britain was also finding its way to the United States. And in 1789, I think the man who was synonymous with the American cotton industry, Samuel Slater, who is a very trained British mechanic. After all, he's a sort of a journeyman. He had been a very trained a British textile mechanic, and he decides to come over and settle down from England to the Rhode Island. And from there, he actually he comes into contact with a very established mercantile family, the Browns, and they together, with the help of the Browns, he establishes the first spinning mill in America. Because weaving was a much more complex task than spinning. It was mechanized more slowly. In 1813, Francois Cabot Lowell, who was a part of this Boston mercantile clan, brought from England to the US the plans for setting up a power loom. Now, Lowell's achievement was more than just introducing the new weaving machines, but at the same time, when he introduces these looms, which are absolutely placed under a single roof or in a single building, this improves the spinning machinery too. And this is also the beginning of the first integrated textile mill in the US. Now, let me go on to talk about some other details. Now, before the coming of the innovations that I'm interested in speaking today, so far as spinning and weaving are concerned, 4 of the 5 basic questions involved in the production of cotton goods were traditionally operations involved in the production of cotton goods were traditionally performed by women, and sometimes even child labor was exploited. Only the 5th operation, weaving, was performed by men. So the role of the women was very, very important when it came to the textile industry, because as you know, out of the 5 basic operations, if 4 are handled by women and only 1 is left to men, so obviously it was women's achievement more than men's achievement. Now, women picked out out of the cotton the seeds and seed pods that had not been removed in the cotton field. They then carded the cotton by brushing it with something that resembled a wire dog brush. Next, they shaped it into a roving or a loose strand of roughly paralleled fibers. Finally, they spun the cotton into a filament or yarn, and then this yarn was finally sent to the weavers who wove it into cloth, whether it's rough cloth or whether it's a fine cloth. Now, the cotton manufacturing process was initially mechanized by a new invention. Now, it was mechanized by a new invention, and this invention I speak of is related to the cotton jenny, a word derived from engine, which permitted the production of several strands of cotton yarn simultaneously. Now, the output of the spinner was definitely increasing, but the machine had to be operated by hand power. The quality of output was still not fine, it was still so poor that it continued to be necessary to use cotton yarn running only in one direction of the cloth, with linen or woolen running in the other direction to provide strength and, and durability. Now, the invention that simultaneously improved the quality and output was the spinning machine, which was invented, which was patented or invented uh, at the same around the 1760s, towards the later part of the 1760s, by a person, Richard Arkwright, the same year in which James Watt secured the first patent on his steam engine. Now, both Watt and Arkwright patents were very important in 18th century England, and this Arkwright spinning frame was designed to be used with central power, but because of lack of capital, Arkwright's first central power had to be a blindfolded horse led around a rotating shaft in the basement of his mill. So by 1771, Arkwright had secured financial assistance of a merchant by the name of Jedediah Strutt, and had built a mill driven by water power. So initially, the spinning frame of Arkwright had to be operated by a horse, but it is only later that it comes to be driven by water power. Now, Arkwright went on to make a fortune for himself, and Jedediah Strutt actually augmented his own estate by manufacturing cotton cloth on license from Arkwright. Now, all these ideas were slowly and steadily moving into North America. And particularly, we have there is a growing emergence of an engine market, of some machines. People are interested in buying up machines, and this explains why the fortunes of firms like Bolton and Watt actually they really plummet up, in the sense that there is a heavy demand for the machines that Bolton and Watt sell, not only in England, but there is a heavy demand for such machines also in North America. Now Samuel Slater had actually worked with this person, Jedediah Strutt, and he began his career as a clerk at the age of 18, and later he becomes an overseer, a foreman. Now, Slater was very, very hardworking, very self-contained, and as a young man was always willing to learn and innovate. As cotton mill fever spread throughout the territories of England, he became more convinced that the prosperous mill conditions could not continue, because there would be a lot of competition in England. And if he had to survive, if he had to really think of himself as an entrepreneur, then he had to emigrate to America. And so crossing the Atlantic seemed to be a lure for a person like Slater, but it was not very easy for a skilled mechanic to leave his homeland, because the British government always had a very restrictive policy so far as migration of artisans were concerned. So when this technology, the new technology was being introduced in England, there was always a policy to hide these technological innovations from other countries or regions, which could finally, emerge as competitors to Great Britain in the international market. Now, what Slater did in 1789, almost at the same time the French Revolution began in France, as a 21-year-old very young man, he actually masquerades himself, he actually disguises himself, pretends to be a farm boy, and he actually departs from London. And So he goes to England, he leaves England, goes to the United States, where he thinks that improved textile industry or machinery can be introduced. And the first port of call for him is New York. And in New York, he he makes inquiries whether some people would be able to sustain him with some bit of financial support. And he was advised to get in touch with the Brown family of Providence in Massachusetts, the Brown family, which had a lot of financial resources, and they could actually give him the backing. So this explains how and why Slater actually becomes a part of the Browns in his early career as an entrepreneur in the textile industry in late 18th century America, and also becomes a leading entrepreneur, a leading person in early 20th century America. Now, the Brown family had made a lot of fortune by actually by actually involving themselves in the wholesaling of English manufactured goods. So they were actually exchanging goods with the West Indian islands, with the Caribbeans, and we find that in exchange of West Indian molasses, they were and the in exchange of West Indian molasses, or which were needed for preparation of rum and other products, they were actually exchanging tobacco, which was produced in Connecticut, and also were also dealing with certain cotton piece goods. And there were four brothers in all who were involved in this business. And actually, the youngest amongst them, by the name of Moses Brown, he is the man who actually gets involved in a very big way in cotton manufacture, and also with innovation centering around the new textile machinery. Now, Slater enters into a longish correspondence with Moses, and he tries to spell out why the cotton manufacturing experiment is still dogged with uncertainties, and why it is unproductive, and what are the ways, what are the solutions, what are the remedies that are available to people like them to actually improve the so far the output is concerned. And in 1790, almost a year later, Slater accepts the invitation of Moses Brown to visit Providence to discuss the manufacture of cotton goods by the English method. And undoubtedly, Moses is very much impressed by Slater's command over cotton manufacturing, and he knew that it was time that Slater's ideas should be put into effect. So therefore, with Slater now coming into the fold of the Browns actually make a suggestion that why don't we create a mercantile firm by the name of Amy and Brown, William Amy, who is the son-in-law of Moses, and Brown, the family, and actually bring Slater as one of the people who would be helping them to build a pilot battery of machines, cards, roving machines, and spinning frames. So, in course of time, they realized that it is just not easy to function as Amy and Brown, especially because Slater, their friend, is putting in a lot of effort. So the firm's name is changed to Amy Brown and Slater, and this comes out in 1790. And there is a whole lot of documents about how this company is stitched together in terms of the correspondences between Moses Brown, between Slater, and also the sort of Amy Brown and then the Slater Company. Now, this is all a part of the Harvard University's own collections on business history. And this is a wonderful document. These are wonderful documents in their own right. Now, Slater initially, I repeat, he says that old machines are not good enough. He therefore thinks that new machines should be furnished, and Amy and Brown should provide capital to buy new machines. But he says that we have to think whether the Arkwright machine is good enough to sustain the sort of the new textile production. And he feels that rather than using wood, it would be better to use iron so far as the carding machines engines are concerned, roving frames are concerned, and spinning machines are concerned. Now, he settles down in Providence, and Providence has a very rich history of enterprise. Providence is the home of the Quakers in the US, and as you know, the Quakers are very innovative and very enterprising people. They are a Protestant sect, and wherever you go to North America, particularly in the area which is demarcated as as Providence, this entire area, about 300 miles centering around Boston, you would find that it's the home of the very famous research institutes. It's the home of the very famed universities. It is a place where most of America's rich people stay, and this is also the place of culture. This is the place where the blueprint of American capitalism itself was born in the late 19th century through the efforts of entrepreneurs, industrialists like Alexander Hamilton. So you cannot really think of the reconstitution of the American Constitution of 1789 without ever thinking of the achievements of the people, the business groups in Providence. And we find that even today, Providence is very, very important because we are living in very, very troubled times, in very uncertain times, very uncertain about our own existence in this world in the wake of the pandemic that has come because of the rising COVID infections and the mortality that has accompanied it. Now, at this time too, Providence is playing a big role. So wherever you find that in Providence, you have all the big labs, or name any big labs, they would be stretching over miles and miles of territory. They are all based in Boston or in the surrounding areas. And you will find that here, the major research for COVID is also being carried out. And why it is being carried out? This has a long history because it's of the Quakers. And the Quakers, they have invested heavily in industries. They have invested heavily in research. So the difference between a country like India and a country like US goes like this. For example, even in India, we might have excelled in certain industries. But our business communities are not like Quakers. Quakers always tend to ask questions, not only about their own fate as entrepreneurs, but also they raise questions because what should be or what would be the fate of the world in next 100 years? So if you walk down the streets of London and you cross the Quaker Society building on the Euston Road, and you have the same feeling that you come across in Boston when you go through with the Quaker run institutions. There is a lot of debate within the community, and I think it is only the Parsi community here in India that is somewhat similar to the Quaker, because even today Ratan Tata is the only industrialist in India who is actually thinking about COVID-19 and possibly thinking of the way out. Even if we say that it is a capitalist philanthropy, trying to bridge the gap between the Asian capitalist and the American capitalists, this sort of American philanthropy, which has been indulged by the capitalists, is very, very different from the philanthropy that the Indian industrialists like Birlas, like Ambanis or Adanis encourage. These are very, very piecemeal sort of solutions that the Ambanis and the Adanis have, but it is nowhere closer. Not even a 1 lakh light year would bring them closer to the Quakers. And we find that one of the families which was very, very important is, I mean, the menfolk, as you know, Wilkinsons. You still know that Wilkinsons produces blades, steel blades for shaving. Now, it's the same family, the Wilkinsons, and the Wilkinsons very, very, very important. And the Wilkinsons actually come up from very humble background. Now, Ozil Wilkinson, the family person whose reference I should give to you, or should offer to you, Ozil Wilkinson started off his life as a blacksmith, and then from this particular profession, he is one of the people who catches the eye of Slater, because Wilkinson will produce the parts of the machine that Slater would actually use or would actually introduce in the cotton sector. Ozil's son, David Wilkinson, turns out to be a very clever designer, and he helps Slater to improve on many of his first rough efforts. Now, Slater gets married into the Wilkinson family. He gets married to one of the daughters of Wilkinson, and this actually has a sort of a two-way advantage for him. First, Slater is an innovator. Slater can get the support of the Wilkinson family when he's thinking about these sort of innovations, when he's thinking of building up these sort of new machines. At the same time, he can also bank on them for capital, because the demand for these machines are also growing. The demand for a variety of machines are growing in the US. And the Slaters are very, very clever when it comes to designing these machines and actually, what you may say, produce these machines. And we find that by December 1719, quite early in terms of Slater's involvement in the US, 2 spinning machines are completed, and these machines are actually put into the commercial production. And we really don't know how much of profits actually these machines could make. Once you use these machines, obviously you have an idea of profits. We don't have any data as to the range of profits that might have come about through the use of these machines, but nonetheless, this is a major landmark in the US industrialization, that these machines will definitely help the American textile industry to move forward. Now we have machines, but who are the people who run the machines? It's not the entrepreneurs who would run the machines. They need labor. And we find that most of these people who actually come and start using these machines, they run the machines because they have to get wages or salary by running them. They work for 6 days. Now, many of them are actually old journeymen who have some bit of idea about machines, but at the same time, there are also young boys and girls who are flocking to these factories to work as laborers. So there is a great deal of exploitation of child labor. At the same time, we also know that there was also yet another mode of labor recruitment and pattern of labor utilization. This actually hinged around the family basis of employment. Now, we find that many of these laboring families, many of these early working class families had a lot of children. They might have had 8 or 9 children, and whenever they reached their age group between 7 to 12, they were put into the factories for discharging these sort of responsibilities. So there is a great deal of disparity in terms of wages. A man's wage is very, very different from a woman's wage, and so is a child's wage different from that of the mother and the father. The next issue is that how is the marketing process to be done? We have gone through this process of producing cloth, and how this could be actually sold by the mercantile family firm of Amy and Brown. Now, slowly and steadily, we find that these early companies who are involved with textile production, they are entering into a sort of commercial liaison with small firms which are based in Boston, which actually might have some business connections also with other parts of Europe and also with other parts of the US. And one such firm is a firm by the name of Hussey, Faber and Company. And the Hussey, Faber and Company actually has a great deal of knowledge of the Atlantic seaboard, the sort of market that is there in the Atlantic seaboard. So we find that there are also a lot of people who are getting interested in the sale of this sort of yarn, in the sale of this yarn across America, also to other parts of Europe. And one of the families apart, and one of the firms apart from Hussey, Faber and Company is a family firm that goes by the name of Merit in New York State. Now you also you know the Merit, because Merit still today is there, sewing machine Merit. So the family, so you find that Merit actually also helps Amy and Brown to not only produce cloth by utilizing water power, but at the same time also selling this yarn across other parts of America. And Amy and Brown also gets in touch with small storekeepers in Portland, in Newburyport, in Marblehead, in Salem, in Boston, in New Bedford, in Nantucket, which are all areas between New York and Philadelphia. Now these are all very small port towns, inland ports between New York and Philadelphia. This entire between those 200 kilometers, you will have all these areas, and barring Portland. And also there are some of these coastal cities in Massachusetts which also try to get a lot of yarn from Rhode Island and Connecticut. So the trade within America is very, very important for the fortune of the cotton textile industry. And you could locate the connectivities that exist between New York City, between Albany, which is in the upland New York State, between Philadelphia, and also Baltimore. So you can see that within a space of 700, 800 or 1,000 kilometers, the sort of a market is coming into existence. And this explains why there should be a greater deal of demand and there should be a greater deal of production. So this also explains why innovations need to be done. So obviously we find that rather than animal power, how the water power could be used to actually operate machines for producing a larger quantity of woven goods now comes into existence. Larger quantity of woven goods, and that too also a very improved quality can actually come into existence, because previously the machines and also the animal power and also the designing of the machines were not really that much congenial for production of improved quality of cotton textiles or cotton yarn. But now the low quality can be replaced by a much more improved quality of yarn and cloth. But there were also business rivalries. There were also jealousies that were creeping up. And we find that this sort of jealousy would also divide the Amy Brown and Slater company. And the Browns at one length of time would be very unhappy with Slater, and Slater himself would actually promote the very idea of setting up a new cotton mill in Warwick, which is a few miles southwest of Providence. So the Browns have their own factory. Slater has his own factory, so as to say, and the old friendship is also not there. So so the Browns and the Slaters, rather than being rather than being business friends, actually now end up as rivals in the cotton textile industry. And this sort of rivalry is not really bad. It is not really an omen for the so far as the future of the cotton textile industry is concerned, because the battle between the Slaters and the Browns, so far as erecting new mills are concerned, actually will give a far greater momentum to the cotton textile industry. So obviously there are new competitors who are coming into the market, and new competitors also are trying to downsize the sort of the earlier disabilities and improve and bring about very improved mills which can churn out cloth which is based on mass production. So marketing now is also a matter of competition, and we find that they are trying to actually eat into the same firms. Both Browns and the Slaters are actually trying to tame their old business contact for their own partisan interests, and this becomes a sort of a very ugly business rivalry. It has an impact on the American textile market in the early part of the 19th century, but it eases out. This sort of difficulty actually eases out later by the 1820s. Now, some of the economic historians would also argue that this sort of depression that is there in the American textile industry in the early part of the 19th century, despite all the innovations that I talk about, is actually brought about by a depression, and a depression which actually hits the hinterland of the commercial ports, and it also, and indirectly, it hits the fortunes of Amy Brown and Slater, and also when the Browns and the Slater are trying to sell their products very, very differently. So obviously, when the situation eases out, one group of firms which are based in the coastal areas would actually offer their services to Amy and Brown, and the other group would provide very, very lucrative offers to the mills that are being run by Slater. So the historian, any any person who's dealing with economic history would now pose another question before we actually wind up this debate, is how this sort of these new industries, or the people who ran these new industries, were trying to regulate the price. Were they trying to regulate the price? Were they trying to centralize a policy that would actually take control of the ups and downs, the troughs in the so far as the price levels are concerned? The variations, you cannot really say that there were no variations in the price. Of course, there were variations in the price, but then it is a very, very competitive market. And obviously, both the Amy and Brown, and also Slater, were trying to make their weavers conscious of the fact that they needed to produce far cheaper yarn than what they were doing earlier. So actually, this also forces them to come to sort of understandings between them. So understanding between them are quite open between Amy and Brown, who are one set of people, and Slater, who's on the other who's on the other side. So they are not only producing yarn through centralized production, keeping the machines under a single roof, but they are also entering into negotiations with families who run their looms in lieu of money they receive from these business companies. So whoever is able to actually minimize the costs of production are actually the people who would actually move ahead. So the Slater mills actually they are in a good condition. They are in a good position, because they are not only able to come into contact with the with the local families which are producing yarn through looms. But at the same time, the slater mills on their own are also producing greater quantities of goods. So obviously, when the market demand is growing, the slater families are able to meet a large chunk of this growing market. So obviously, slater actually emerges ahead of Amy and Brown. He is a wealthy man by the 1820s. He is the person who is running the white mill at Robotet, which is a part of Providence. Now, with the outbreak of the Spanish-American War in 1812, Slater sees this as an opportunity of extending his business interests by taking advantage of the period when British imports are shut down from the American coastline. He says that it would be better, he says to his employees, that we should take care of the American market. There is no British cloth that is coming through the Atlantic, but rather we should set up new mills where we can actually produce the textile that will be needed in other parts of America. Now, this explains why a host of textile mills actually come up in places like Oxford, Massachusetts, and also in several other places which are in Providence. So this becomes so why from 1812 onwards, we find that Slater is finding new business partners. Now, who are these new business partners? These new business partners are people like Edward Howard. Now, Edward Howard is an Englishman who knows that the conditions are ripe in America for investment in the cotton textile industry, and he comes to an understanding with Slater, and they two together are responsible for setting up this mill at Oxford. But there are also the other mills that are coming about. It's just not really cotton. It's also the woolen mill in Oxford. It's also the mill at Slatersville. It's also a mill at Wilkinsonsville. It is also a mill at Amos-Keag. So these are all these new mills which are coming into existence. Now, the labor. I would like to end with this entire discussion with labor. Now, what happens to the labor in the 1810s and 1820s? Who are the people who are coming in? Now, from the names of the workers who were employed in these mills or in these looms, it is very clear that most of them had English ancestry. The names recorded are Tiffany, Hitchcock, Green, Petty Place, Holmes, Fuller, Simons, Munayan, Howland, Johnson, Hill, Caddy, Chase, Benson, Reynolds, so on and so forth. These are all typical Christian names with a Puritan influence. So it only proves that some of the sects of the Protestant Christians were into this sort of industrial exercise, into this sort of entrepreneurship, and they were the people who actually gave Slater's Mill the advantage. They were the people who actually gave up their own nationality of that being English and adopts their own nationality as being Americans when it comes to working in Slater's mills. And we find that more and more, we find that the size of the labor force increases. It is not only, there is not only a larger number of men who are expressing their ideas to work in these mills, but there are also equally rising number of females who want to be employed in these mills, and so are the children. But despite this sort of increase in the size of the labor force, the sort of the wage level continues to be depressed. Despite the advantageous wartime period, particularly between 1812 and 1815, nothing much changes so far as the wage structure is concerned. And the disparities in the wage structure, this is not only the disparities within the wage structure, that that should be the disparities within the people who are employed should be concerned, but also the disparity along gender lines, and also the disparity that men and women collectively have vis-a-vis children. So there is both intersectoral disparity as well as intra-sectoral disparity, and I think a lot of economic historians have actually worked on this wage structure. And this is particularly very important because this is also the period of a debate in the wages of workmen, of workers in the textile sector globally. And I think people like Prasannan Parthasarathy have done excellent work. Once again, he is based in Boston. And Prasannan Parthasarathy, when he takes up this entire issue of the wages, of the wage structure, the sort of advantages in the wage structure, the sort of disadvantages in the wage structure, the ups and downs in the wage structure that Prasannan Parthasarathy is talking about, it's also in the period between 1780s and 1820s. So I think I remain very much indebted to Prasannan Parthasarathy when we talk of a transnational approach when it comes to the wage structure itself, and also the sort of debate that has come about in recent years in the researches of people like Ravi Ahuja and so on, so forth. So to wind up, it is Slater who actually moves in from England and actually encourages other entrepreneurs who are interested in America about the setting up of a power loom. And he is not only a single Englishman who is crossing the colony, there are also a lot of Scots and Irish journeymen who are actually moving into America by the 1820s to work in the factories, to work as designers, to be innovators in their own right, and to also lend their entire expertise in blacksmithing to the invention of new machines. And this wouldn't have come, this entire engineering, this entire idea of cotton textile engineering, of in a bigger way, textile engineering would not have emerged had not these emigre artisans been present in the US in the early part of the 19th century. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful and enriching talk. And we have some, not some, actually, it's many questions, and the chat box is flooded with questions. Sir, 4 or 5 participants having the same question. I'm putting forward how for the ethnic groups were affected by the process of industrialization in US at that time. Was there any attempt to compel them as labor?
Well,
yes.
Well, so far as the First Nations were concerned, as I guess from the questions, so far as the First Nation people were concerned, the white men, the colonizers, were already waging war against these First Nation people. They have not been able to defeat all of them by the 1820s. Even there are incidents of wars taking place between the Cherokees and the white settlers in the US, even in the 1830s and 1840s. There was no reason why these people would be drafted in as laborers or workers to run these mills. In any case, they were not trained in the sort of new culture that was coming across because of England's association with its colony, the US. After all, they had not been brought into this new culture at all. But when it comes to actually getting the labor, it's mostly the emigre people who are actually whites who actually board the ships from the English ports, and they reach New York or Boston or Philadelphia, and they are the people who walk into these mills. So there is no issue where we can talk about the Afro-American involvement, because the Afro-American involvement in the textile in the industries, uh, uh, in the textile industry, it is not even visible, even towards the later decades of the 19th century. But of course, it is visible in the meat packaging, in the other industries that really come up in the post Reconstruction period in the U.S. So there's also no question of actually utilizing the Afro-American labor in these mills as laborers. But there is, so far as the relationship, the business or the commercial relationship between when you talk about the commercial prospects of this textile industry, you also talk about the relations that these people will have with the American South when it comes to on a reciprocal basis. They produce the finer cloth that goes into the American South, and at the same time they also draw in the cotton that the American South produces, and because they need this cotton to be produced in larger quantities in the American South, and that can only happen because through the utilization of slave labor or captive labor.
Sir, another question from Otonu Das. Did Abraham Lincoln played any positive role for industrialization in America?
Well, Lincoln came at a very, very difficult time when this debate on slavery was raging in America. Now, already there are many divides within the U.S. even till today. It's as you say, that India is also not a nation in that sense. It's a nation within nations, or it's a nation of nations. At the same time, even the U.S. is also very, very divided in terms of the population, or also in terms of regions. For example, we know that there have been differences between when you talk of the Atlantic seaboard and when you talk of the Midwest or the western parts, because the East actually was initially the place where the white settlers settled down, and then they start moving into the West, particularly from the 1820s, 1830s, and the westward march would only be completed in the 1890s, when they reach up to the Pacific, or when there is a sort of a railroad link between the eastern seaboard area and the Pacific seaboard area. The sort of this Great American Railway, the Great Canadian Railway, these are all examples of how the East has moved towards the West. But at the same time, there are also differences between the American South and the American North. The American South, as you know, still today, it is still backward compared to the Eastern Seaboard or parts of the West, or even the Midwest, because for a fairly long period of time, these are all these all housed, I would say, plantation enclaves or plantation economies, producing a variety of commercial crops, and these were also utilizing the African slaves who were being brought in right from 1680 onwards to about 1800. The movement of slaves is uninterrupted. It goes around the middle path or the Atlantic sea route. And we find that American North, by the time Lincoln is actually putting himself into this debate whether slavery is useful or whether slavery is a horrendous institution in terms of exploitation of mankind, and the sort of debate that Lincoln enters into with Stephen Douglas, American North has actually progressed. American North has actually progressed because American North has been linked through canals. The canals actually bring about the second phase of industrial revolution, which is not the part of my talk today. And the linkage, the sort of river linkage that is there in the 1820s, 1830s, and at the same time, 1840s, it is the steamboat. It is the introduction of the steamboat in the river traffic or in the inland transportation that uh, actually blows away the initial ideas about industrialization, brings in new ideas about industrialization. And Lincoln arrives at this time, sometime between in the 1840s and early 1850s. So this sort of change is very much manifested in several sectors, so far as the Atlantic seaboard area or the northern part of America is concerned. But in the southern part, there is still this institution of slavery that is preferred by the white planter lobby. And the American North says that it has a new idea. Why don't we have industrialization based on free labor? Why do we need captive labor? If we actually remove this entire idea of captive labor from our hearts and actually go in for arrangements with labor on a personal level, on a sort of a voluntary level, sort of a involuntary level, then it is easier for us to have very enhanced levels of productivity. To the south, to them, the south is actually the very home of this entire backwardness, conservatism, and so on and so forth. So Lincoln actually is not able to resolve the crisis. Lincoln dies, but after his death, when the Union and the Confederacy finally come into one, when the great divide is avoided within the US over this question of slavery, then there is a time for people who step into White House after Lincoln to think about industrialization more than Lincoln had thought about. And this, I think, is very much visible in the researches of this institution of slavery. Time on the Cross, this great book, Time on the Cross, Richard Fogel and Stanley Ingerman, who are Nobel laureates in the US. Fogel and Ingerman had actually brought out this very debate very, very clearly by making a comparative study between the American North and the American South.
Okay, sir. One more question. Anu Pole wants to know, is it true that the invention of cotton gin and availability of slave labor caused the rapid expansion of the cotton textile industries during the period under discussion?
Obviously, cotton gin is an engine which can actually increase the productive levels so far as any industry is concerned. And this sort of innovations are also being tried out in the US. This sort of inventions come to the US, then it leads to further innovations, and then it leads to inventions of new machines also. This is fairly clear in the sort of the long discussion that I had. And of course, for cotton, because American cotton is very much in demand, because they have the long staple cotton, which in our case in India doesn't produce the long staple cotton. Egypt produces a long staple cotton along with the American South. So the American South, unless and until it had this large concentration of slave labor, it would have been very difficult for them to get cotton from other sources. And particularly, that this was in the aftermath of the great wars that the European powers waged. It was not easy for the Americans to come to India and get the raw cotton because the British were sitting out there. So there was obviously very less opportunity on the part of the Americans to get this supply of cloth, to get the supply of cotton or any other items linked to the cotton textile industry from the British colonies. So what they did was to essentially rely on their own southern parts to produce the cotton and send them over to the Atlantic seaboard area, particularly the Providence area, for the manufacture of this sort of very improved yarn and cloth.
Sir, we have many questions, but the time does not permit here. Sir, it was really, really enriching and insightful. And on behalf of the Department of History and Sripat Singh College, I express our regards from the bottom of our heart, and thank you for being with us and devoted your time. And we will be looking forward to listening you again in near future, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure on my part too. And thanks to the people who also are in the virtual space for actually coming together in this Sunday afternoon to listen to stories about North America, which many people are not very familiar with in India. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So I hope we had a very excellent presentation from Professor Rashford Bosho, and now we will move on to our next session. And in this session we have sorry, there is an announcement from our convener, Sri Sagar Shimlandi, regarding the feedback form and the attendance sheet. Sagar.
Good afternoon to all. Many participants are asked many questions to our organizer, so I will announce for you. All the participants are earnestly requested to keep their patience about attendance sheet and feedback link. Attendance sheet and feedback are not same. Attendance sheet will be given only YouTube chat box, not WhatsApp group, because tomorrow we will not given in attendance sheet in WhatsApp group because our technical problem. So I request dear participant, you will follow our YouTube chat box only attendance sheet link or feedback link. Final feedback link will provide any day of the workshop. Please follow our YouTube chat box because final feedback form not be open only 2 hours, but you are clearly clearly fill up the final feedback form because final feedback form will all information and spelling provided through the final feedback form would be used in e-certificate, no manual correction, but it is auto-generated e-certificate. So I request, please carefully fill up final feedback form. It will given any day of the workshop. Please stay with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sagadda. Now we are having another eminent scholar from Aligarh Muslim University, Dr. Gulfisha Khan, and I am taking this privilege to welcome ma'am. I am expressing my regards to give me the opportunity to welcome you again, though on this virtual platform on the first time. We are really grateful to you. So before I request ma'am to go ahead with her deliberation, I would shortly introduce her. Dr. Gulfisha Khan is an associate professor in the Center of Advanced Study, Department of History, Aligarh Muslim University. She did her MPhil from Aligarh Muslim University and DPhil from the Faculty of Modern History, University of Oxford. Her areas of specialization include the idea of Europe in the discourses of the Indo-Persian elite, their perceptions of the causes of the rise of Europe, its political, religious, and cultural institutions, new European science and technology, rise of colonialism in the late 18th century, and the Orientalist, Occidentalist discourses, British perceptions of Hafiz Shirazi, the Aligarh movement, and Muslim female education. Her current research is the reign of Emperor Shah Jahan, the 17th century Indo-Persian historiography, study of Padshahnama as a source of imperial Mughal court culture. She delivered a number of invited lectures in national and international seminars and conferences. She has received many awards and fellowships, and she has presented 17 research papers in seminars and conferences abroad, and 84 papers in national, international seminars, conferences in the country. She has published a number of books to her name. I'll mention a few. Indian Muslim Perceptions of the West during the 18th Century from Oxford University Press, essays on Sayyid Ahmed Khan and Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah, and a monograph Khwaja Shams al-Din Muhammad Hafiz Shirazi and the early British Romantics. So with this short introduction, I invite ma'am to deliver her lecture, and she will be talking on explorations in Mughal architecture with special reference to Taj Mahal. Ma'am, over to you. Unmute yourself. Ma'am, please, can you hear me? Ma'am?
Gulfi sir, ma'am, kindly unmute yourself, please, ma'am.
Ma'am is there, no?
Ma'am is present in the meeting.
লাইনে আছে
Yes, yes.
Yes. And can you hear?
Ma'am, please.
Hello,
Ma'am,
hello,
please
could you
come.
hear me?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
ma'am. You are audible.
clearly. You can start.
You could see me
Ma'am,
as
please
well.
turn on.
No,
Ma'am, please turn
turn
on
on
your
your
video.
video, then only we can see you.
Video on kar do isko. My
Okay,
video
now,
is
Okay,
my
thank you,
video
ma'am.
is on.
okay, now this
Thank
is clear.
What
You
about
can
the
start.
slides? What about the slides?
Okay. Shagoda? Is it okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
This is thanks a lot, Emily, for introducing me. It's very nice to hear your own students introducing you. I am really thrilled. It was very generous and very good experience to be introduced by a student rather than your seniors. So, but today's topic is slightly different than I have been studying, and it is on the request of Emily that instead of talking about something on 18th or 19th century, there should be a talk on the Mughal Empire because people will be more interested. So I chose this topic. Next slide, please. This, all of you know, you are looking at the Taj Mahal. We'll be talking about Taj Mahal soon, but before that, we are having sort of feeling about the Mughal architecture. As all of us know that Mughal Empire was established with the Babur in 1526, and thereafter there is the reign of Humayun, thereafter there is the reign of Akbar, and all of them have got their own monuments. But we are having a look of almost all the monuments, and nowadays for the Mughal Empire, more than the political history, it is mainly the art and architecture of Mughal Empire which is so much in fashion. So there are scholars working on the art and architecture. There are two ways to work on the art and architecture. One is through visual perception, how we look at the buildings, how we interpret various aspects of the buildings, and another is through studying the text. So in my case, obviously, I'm also fond of looking at the buildings like many of us are, but I also study the text where there are descriptions of these buildings. So in case of the Mughal buildings, we find very detailed account of almost all the buildings, but some things are there and something is also missing. But whatever is there, we try to reconstruct as to what is the reason that such monuments came into existence. But just as you have a different background, so I'm introducing you that how the Mughal historians, they describe various buildings, especially the buildings of Emperor Shah Jahan. Even before that, most of the buildings are described in the Indo-Persian historiography because the language of the court and culture at that time was Persian. So these books are written in Persian language. So Tara was the term used for proposed map or design of a building, that how what kind of building the emperor wants or his nobles are going to construct. So first of all, obviously, like today, the tarah or the plan proposed map was made. Then some terms are there, for instance, like Chihil Sutun, which has been so much discussed. This is 40 pillared construction. This is the term usually applied to what we call nowadays as Diwan-e-Am and Diwan-e-Khas. Then there is Iwan. Any construction, large size construction was called Iwan. So then Khwabgah, we know that the emperor's personal sleeping chambers or the Khwabgah, private chambers, Diwan-e-Am. These are some of the terms which the historians are using in the Indo-Persian sources when they are describing various monuments. Next, please. Because we are focusing on the reign of Emperor Shah Jahan, and as we know that the first or the founder of the Mughal Empire is Babur, who came from Central Asia, and we will see that he brought so many influences from Central Asia also. And Babur is mainly credited with the introduction of Chahar Bagh in Agra and other places. Chahar Bagh, which became very common or rather sort of trademark of the Mughal architecture. So there is Babur, and thereafter we saw that there is the reign of Humayun, who was his son. So he also has the credit of constructing a whole city known as Din Panah, which is part of Delhi now. And the third Mughal emperor comes Jahangir, who is better known for his love of paintings rather than architecture. But he also has got a number of monuments constructed. Major monument is at Sikandra, that is his father's tomb. But then we come to the reign of Akbar. Akbar was not only a great conqueror but also a builder, and we know that there is Fatehpur Sikri, there is Jami Mosque there is Buland Darwaza is there. So there existed a sort of tradition of founding whole cities in the Mughal Empire. And Shah Jahan, when he comes, in his case, his passion was not so much with the paintings, but it was mainly with the architecture. So he ascended the Mughal throne in 1528, and he ruled until 1658. From 1628 to 1658, and we can also call him architect emperor of India. And it is considered sort of glorious epoch in history of India, because the only person who wrote a full-length book on Shah Jahan is B.P. Saxena of Allahabad, and he thinks that it was a glorious epoch. Not much work is done on Shah Jahan because none of his history has been translated into English. It's all there in Indo-Persian, and most of his histories are known as Shah Jahanama. But if we study Shah Jahanama, like many scholars are studying, we find that he was a major patron of architecture. And it is the best known aspect of his patronage is architecture. And it started not when he became emperor, rather he started patronizing when he was just a prince, known as his original name is Sultan Khurram. We find he was also patronizing painting. There is an album of him which is there in New York Metropolitan Museum and British Library, and there was development of calligraphy also, and Hindustani music was also patronized by him. Family of Lal Khagun Samudra, we know, master vocalist Jagannath, and he played a vital role in conceiving and designing and planning of his architecture. So mainly I'll be focusing what is his patronage of architecture, but what I'm trying to say that other arts like the painting, like the music, they were also part of court culture during the reign of Emperor Shah Jahan. They are very well documented. What we need to study those books which are written basically in Persian, but Sanskrit was also patronized. As we know now, there is a work by Audrey Trushke which shows that how Mughals patronized Sanskrit also. So, but we are coming back again to his artistic patronage, and scholars who are studying his architecture. His architecture has been studied not by one but many scholars studying art of Shah Jahan, art historians, and they call that almost every building has something which we call Shah Jahani perfectionism. And not only he himself, because even his nobles, Among his nobles, you will be knowing Asaf Khan, who was brother of well-known Lady Noor Jahan. They were also patron themselves, and there are other nobles who constructed their own tomb, like there is Chini Karoza in Agra, constructed by his prime minister, whose name is Mullah Shukrullah Shirazi. So we find their sort of interest in the building activity was common even among his nobles. So there are proliferation of royal buildings throughout the Indian continent, subcontinent, and you will find forts, we find palaces, we find hunting lodges built by him, we find caravanserais, pavilions, and gardens, mosques, and tombs throughout the empire. Actually, his historians say that Emperor Shah Jahan had a plan that entire Hindustan or whole of India should be embellished with new buildings. So even if we look at his gardens, which are not exactly something which I thought I'll be talking here, but if you look at his garden, because if you go to Kashmir, you will find that the famous garden, the Shalimar Garden of Kashmir or the Shalimar Garden of Lahore, and there was a Shalimar Garden here in Delhi also. See, equally like the architecture, we find that he constructed lot of gardens also, and most of the gardens are known as Chahar Bagh gardens, that is quadruped gardens, because Mughals actually came, as we know, from Central Asia, and in Central Asia there existed a tradition of gardening. So with Shah Jahan comes also gardens were extremely important. They were part of life because nobles or the royalty, they sat there, they enjoyed there, they listened poetry there, they had politics there. So in a hot country like India, gardens were very important. Babur, when he made capital, Agra his capital, he founded gardens, and he writes in Baburnama that people of Agra used to call Agra, that Agra has become little Kabul, because Kabul was known for gardens where Emperor Babur is lying buried, and his tomb is there in a garden. And gardens were usually the setting for the tombs also. So I am introducing you that how the Mughals were extremely interested. They were great patrons of art and architecture, and there are so many influences on their mind. We can see next, please. Next, please. Yes. But yes, we can see what are the sources of inspiration, because the architectural historians or the historians, art historians, they look more at the features. But features, I think, beginning with Percy Brown, features of various monuments of India have been very well studied. So we historians usually look what are the source of inspiration. Why only architecture was such an obsession with the Mughals? And historians have come with the theory that one reason could be that it is a means to show to the people that we are rulers, to show their political power. Even for the gardens led by Babur, there is theory by scholars like Catherine Escher and all. They think that they were showing that how we can control even nature. So that was part of their thinking by laying gardens. Similarly, in the case of the buildings, we should look what are the sources of inspiration. One major source of inspiration in case of Shah Jahan is Timur, Amir Timur, because Timur, although he is invader of India, but he was greatly revered by all the Mughals as their ancestor, as a progenitor, and they wanted to follow him as a world conqueror. And in case of Shah Jahan, he also takes this title of Sahab Qiran Sani, which means Lord of Auspicious Planetary Conjunction, because it's very strange that this is astrological title, Sahab Qiran Sani, somebody born when there was auspicious conjunction of planetary conjunction. But this title was taken up by Shah Jahan also, and he has this title apart from his name, Shah Jahan. He also had this title of Sahib Quran Sani, and he has great fondness for achieving what Amir Timur achieved as a builder, as somebody or as a ruler who sort of beautified entire Samarkand. So Shah Jahan was greatly inspired that Indian cities or cities of his empire should be beautified by construction of new buildings. So one major source was Amir Temur, and the Zafarnama, which is a book or sort of biography of Amir Temur, it written by his historian Sharfuddin Ali Yazdi, was a book which Shah Jahan was studying most of the time. So we feel that some inspiration comes there also. But for Taj Mahal, there is a scholar whose name is Bagley. He thinks that the source of inspiration was also some Sufi books in which it was imagined that this is the paradise. So he was creating paradise for his wife, paradise on earth, because this idea, paradisical imagery, is very common in the Mughal architecture. So Babur laid gardens, Humayun founded Dine Panah city in Delhi, which we can locate, but the buildings are no more there. Akbar was a great builder. We know Fatehpur Sikri is considered to be a very unique kind of capital city, studied by many scholars. Then we know the tomb of Akbar at Sikandra, and we also know that who is the construct. I am talking about Humayun's tomb, because it is Humayun's tomb at Delhi which is one of the source for the construction of Taj Mahal. And the builder is Mir Ghiyas, who came from Central Asia, mainly from the city of Herat, because Herat and Bukhara at that time happened to be great centers of culture under the Timurids and these Mughals, these Mughal rulers whom we call Mughal. Actually, they like to be called Timurids because they thought that they are the successors of Timur. So much influences in architecture, in Mughal architecture also comes from indigenous influences are there, as we could see in the Fatehpur Sikri architecture and other architecture. And there are also influences from Herat, from Bukhara, and there are also influences from Iran. We all know about Asaf Khan, who played such an important role, who happened to be the Prime Minister of Wakil, Prime Minister of Jahangir, and now actually having one of the major position of Wakil under Shah Jahan. He was also Emperor Shah Jahan's father-in-law. So some influences all obviously would have come from Iran also. So Mughal architecture had inspiration from very many sources, indigenous sources, Persian sources, Central Asia, and each and every building which scholars are studying, they are finding different kind of influences. But in case of the tomb architecture, lot of influence is coming from Herat, because this was a family, Mir Ghiyas, who was involved in the construction of Gur Amir. What is Gur Amir? Gur Amir is Amir Temur's tomb in Samarkand, and they were influenced by that architecture also. The Taj Mahal's architecture is influenced by Gur Amir as well as by the Humayun's tomb in Delhi. But obviously, as we could see, that Taj Mahal is very different from the Humayun's tomb in Delhi, or from the tomb or Gur Amir, that of Amir Temur in Central Asia. It's totally different. So, and there is Agra Fort also. Agra Fort has got constructions by Shah Jahan, by Akbar, by Jahangir, perhaps by Babur also. So the Agra Fort is already there. So next, please. Next slide, please. So the earlier, okay, the earlier one. The earlier one. Yes, this or this the same. Here, I would like to tell you very quickly. So, what is the role of education in the architecture? So, if we study Badshahnama, we find that Shah Jahan has got best type of training, because it is said that the architect should be fond of music, architect should know obviously the geometry, and perhaps Emperor Shah Jahan knew a lot. And this is also sort of tradition with the historiography, that entire credit is usually given to the emperor, or because he is the major patron. So it is very difficult to find who are the architects. So there is no single architect actually of any of the Mughal building. There are not single architect. There are so many architects who are involved. It's Mughal buildings is a sort of teamwork actually. So major role played is by Shah Jahan himself, who has the right kind of education to be himself architect, emperor of India. He was interested. He used to listen music. There are references that how he patronized the families of musicians, which later on became Hindustani music, tradition of Hindustani music. He patronized Sanskrit writings, which we can do at some other place, but already Tashke, a young scholar, is already doing it. And but there is also one name comes, which is Ahmad Mimar. Actually, lot have been written about him, because people always like for Humayun's tomb. Just now we saw there was architect who came from Herat, but we think that who are the architect of Shah Jahani buildings? So there was a man whose name was Lutfullah, who was writing in the beginning of the reign of Emperor Aurangzeb, and he wrote a diwan. What is diwan? Diwan is actually the collection of poetry in which he claimed that my father, whose name is Ahmad, and he was a Mimar. Mimar means actually the architect, and he was giving this title of Nadirul Asr by Emperor Shah Jahan. Nadirul Asr means wonder of the age. He was a renowned architect who was involved in the construction of Red Fort, also in the construction of Taj Mahal, and he had knowledge of geometry. Therefore, he had the title of Mohandis. He has knowledge of mathematics, and he was also a person who knew something about astronomy. Therefore, he was Astrolab Shinas. So he gives so many titles to his father, but the official historians do not say who is actually the architect. Official historians, their names is Abdul Hamid Lahori. There are a number of official historians of the reign of Emperor Shah Jahan, and they are very voluminous chronicles, voluminous histories. But there is mention of Ahmad Mimar, and not in the context of Taj Mahal, but in the context of the Red Fort. That Ahmad Mimar and Hamid, they were two experienced architects who were involved in the construction of Red Fort. Red Fort, which was known as sometimes Qilai Walla or sometimes Qilai Ark. That is all it means is palace or the fortress, but not in the context of Taj Mahal. In the context of Taj Mahal, there are two names actually. One is Abdul Karim and another is Makarmat Khan. So we know that Abdul Karim was a very seasoned or expert architect of Emperor Jahangir, who constructed Lahore forts, parts of Lahore forts, and he also was involved in the construction of Taj Mahal. And Makarmat Khan, we do not know whether he was actually an architect or he was a supervisor. But Makarmat Khan, a man who came from Iran, who spent whole of his life here in India in the service of Emperor Shah Jahan, and he was later our governor of Delhi, which became known as Shah Jahanabad. He was also supervisor. But if we look at the biography of Makarmat Khan, we find that he received very high quality education in Iran, in the place known as Shiraz and other places where science, where geometry, where astrology, where mathematics, all these subjects were being taught. So there is not a single architect. There are sort of team of architects in which supervision is mainly done by Emperor Shah Jahan, because all the official historians, they go on emphasizing that Shah Jahan spends lot of time in consultation with architects, with painters, with planners, and he supervises most of the things himself. And there is also testimony of contemporary writers who are not exactly the court historians, like Chandrabhan Brahman. Chandrabhan Brahman was very close to the Emperor Shah Jahan, especially Emperor Shah Jahan's Prime Minister Shukrullah Shirazi. So there is testimony of Chandrabhan Brahman also. He spent whole of his life in the service of the Mughal emperors, died during the beginning of the reign of Emperor Aurangzeb looking after the tomb of Jahangir in Lahore, he also says similar things, that most of the buildings are conceived and executed by Emperor Shah Jahan, who is very good in mathematics, in geometry. Besides, just now I told you that there is testimony of Chandrabhan Brahman also, and during the time of Emperor Shah Jahan, some scientific works were done, like a Zijje Shah Jahani, that there was interest in geometry, mathematics, and sciences. There was growth of exact sciences also, which would have given indirect boost to the art of architecture. Next, please. Yes, just now I explained to you, I will not stop very long on this particular slide because it may be looking very, very dense to you. It is a translation done by one architect, long time back architect in the Archaeological Survey of India, but it is very famous translation done by him, which has been cited by many scholars working on the architecture of Shah Jahan. And in this particular translation, it is being established that Shah Jahan was looking after, or rather examining, the work of artists of his buildings, or the painters, and he has also translated a very, very good Arabic phrase. Arabic phrase is here, you can say that his historians have written, verily our monuments will tell of us. So this is an Arabic phrase which says, which if you study it from original, a 13th century Arabic work, which says that after we have gone, that means after our death, our works, whether it is art or architecture, whatever it is, this will tell about us. So that was sort of motto of all the works done by Emperor Shah Jahan, not only Taj Mahal, but also other places, mainly like Shah Jahanabad. And just now I told you that he had great interest in land development, urban planning, nourishing of purity. So this is very dense, but it comes from Shah Jahanama. So we should go next, please. Yes. So in the next, these are just the descriptions which historians who are working on exactly on the features and architecture, they are using this information from Padshanama, and I'm also showing this for your knowledge. Like once Shah Jahan went to Kabul, because Kabul he used to go very often. Kabul was part of Mughal Empire at that particular time, and on way he stopped somewhere at a place Peshawar, and in Peshawar he saw that there was a covered market, and he immediately wrote to Makarmat Khan that such a covered market should be immediately constructed in the new city of Shah Jahanabad. And another example I am showing you, that how the buildings were planned. It was something like this, that the emperor used to first consult the Tarah, the planning or the design, with some of his major architects. He used to go inside, and thereafter, when he has approved that this is the plan or Tarah according to which this building should be constructed, that was handed over to the Department of Royal Building. The Department of Royal Building was known as Sarkar Khasa Sharifa, with instruction that now this map has been approved, this Tarah has been approved, and now the building can be constructed like this. So next, please. I have already explained to you that Tarah was very, very important. And this, I do not know whether it's very small, whether you will be able to read it or not. This is something in which the historians are saying that they are giving precise detail, that what kind of material is being used. As we know that by the time of Emperor Shah Jahan, there is emphasis on use of the white marble rather than the red sandstone. So now there is a change to Sange Marmar. The white marble is known as Sange Marmar. So now instead of Sange Surkh red sandstone, and Sangemarmar white marble, which is obtained from Makrana in Rajasthan, and use of chuna patiali, quick lime, precious and semi-precious stones, pearls, rubies. Okay, so we find all these details. Pearls and rubies, if you would have seen the Taj Mahal, you could see that there was distinct kind of decoration by stone. They were original pearls of rubies and other original pearls. They are no more there, but the way they were executed, that is mosaic work, that in Persian is known as Munabbatkari, or the stone relief work. And another is known as Parchinkari, or stone intarsia, or girhabandi, geometrical ornamentation. So these are the various terms used, and Parchinkari was very distinct type of stone intarsia, which with which the Taj Mahal is being decorated. And it is sometimes also known as the pietra dura, which is an Italian term, but I think Parchinkari, or the Prachinkari, the ancient art of India, is the proper term, because to my mind there is no influence from Europe on any building of India. There is definite influence from the Middle East, like rock of dome, which is a major monument of Jerusalem. The dome has lot of impact on architecture, but definitely there is no any influence from the Europe. So here also I told you that how there are many gardens. The Shalimar Garden, original name of the Shalimar Garden was Shalamar, because there was already an ancient garden there. Shalamar is a term, a local term in Kashmir, which means abode of pleasure. But Emperor Shah Jahan made two gardens here, and he called it Farabakhsh and Fezbakhsh, the new gardens there. And there are, we already know that apart from that, the same, just now I told you, name of the same garden was constructed later on Lahore, and also in Delhi Shalimar is no more there. Next please, because we have got hot. Yes, this I have already emphasized. I will not stay here at all. Next please. This is role of Emperor Shah Jahan. Next please. And this also I have told you. Next please. Next please. This is about Shah Jahanabad. I have already told you. Yes, we can stay here. We can stay here. Aminuddaulah Safa, I have already told you that we can stay on. Last please. Next. Next please. Next, yes, we can do this. Diwane Biutat, or we can do this also, doesn't matter. I introduce you that during the reign of Emperor Shah Jahan, there is lot of interest by the nobles also. There is this one major noble whose name is Asaf Khan Aminuddaulah, and actually Aminuddaulah had lot of sense of architecture, but he was very unlucky in the sense that his daughter was married to Emperor Shah Jahan, and she died, and thereafter was not so much in favor, but he was so much fond of construction that he constructed his own palace in Agra, one palace in Agra, one palace in Lahore, because Mughal Empire had not one, not two, but three capitals. One capital was Agra, which was known as Mustaqar Khilafa. Another capital was always Lahore, and another capital was later on Shah Jahanabad. So Agra, because that is a traditional capital, Delhi, because it is capital of India since ancient times, and Lahore was important because through Lahore it was easy to reach, to enter into present-day Afghanistan or to Central Asia or to Iran, because India was more connected at that time, not with Europe, not with America obviously, but mainly with the Middle East or the Islamic Middle East. So Lahore provided connection to enter into the Middle Eastern world, from where people were always coming. There was continuous movement of ideas, people coming and going. So through Asaf Khan, so Asaf Khan built two palaces, one in Agra and another in Lahore, which had been extensively described by the European visitors who came to India. There was Bernier, there was Tavernier, that these were the palaces of Asaf Khan, more beautiful than the royal palace of Agra, more beautiful than the Lahore's palace, but it's very unlucky that both of his palaces are no more. They have been destroyed. The Agra one was destroyed in the 1857, and Lahore we do not know. There is no trace of his two palaces. Only thing is left of him is his own tomb, which was not constructed by him, but the tomb was constructed with the orders of Emperor Shah Jahan. His tomb, as well as the tomb of Emperor Jahangir, was constructed with the orders of Emperor Shah Jahan, but obviously they have no such quality as is the tomb of his own wife. Next, please. Next, please. Yes. So this I have already told you. So, but I am telling you that apart from Asaf Khan, who died in 1641, there was also a man whose name is Allami Afzal Khan. Allami Afzal Khan also got constructed one of his tomb, which is in Delhi, which is known as Chini Ka Roza, because very strange, it has got influences from China, therefore it became known as Chini Ka Roza. Actually, the tradition in Mughal Empire was like this, that these nobles, whatever they had actually, that belonged to the emperor. So what nobles did, they started practicing one thing, that when they died, they liked it that they should be buried in their own houses, in their own palaces. Okay, so that was perhaps the house of Allami Afzal Khan. When he died, he was buried there, so that the emperor is not going to escheat it, because their leftover money, their whatever they had, that belonged to the empire. These Mughal bureaucrats, they had no control over their money, so they opted, they preferred that their house should be retained. So a scholar whose name is Eva Koch, she has studied Agra recently, and in Agra she discovered numerous palaces which were built along the river Jamuna, because river was extremely important. Without river you cannot build any palace, because water was so essential. Why Delhi is important? Because of the river Jamuna. Why Agra is important? Because of the river Jamuna. So rivers were very important. So they constructed. So those who studied both the sides of river Jamuna in Agra, they found traces of houses of the nobles, as has been described by the nobles or the various works written during that period. And very luckily, there is a map in the Jaipur library, Imperial Library of Jaipur, Rajas of Jaipur, where there is a map of Agra, which is showing exactly, the map was made in 1720, and it is showing all the buildings of most of these nobles, which were being constructed right from the time of Babur until 1720, when they are described. So those buildings are not there, but in the most of the buildings, these nobles, they liked that their own remains final, they should rest over there, but only the traces have remained on both the sides of Jamuna. Actual building is not there. Next, please. And for your knowledge, you will be surprised to know that Agra, the Taj Mahal, whose name is actually Roza Munawwara. Roza means tomb of anyone. As I told you that the nobles wanted that their houses, their residences in which they have invested whole lot of fortunes, they should not be escheated by the Mughal emperor. So it became their tombs also. So there were houses constructed on both the sides of river Jamuna, because Agra was supposed to be a riverfront city, like Delhi or Shah Jahanabad is also a riverfront city. Without river, nothing can be done. And Shah Jahan had extreme fondness for Srinagar. The third riverfront city which was being developed was Srinagar, and to some extent Lahore also, but main riverfront city was Agra, and next was mainly Srinagar, riverfront city. So these Afzal Khan, for instance, they were so fond of construction that Afzal Khan has got a house here in Agra, which is now Chini Ka Roza. He has got a house in Lahore, which is no more there. And he also constructed a Karmasarai in Kashmir, which is in a very broken state now. And he also laid garden in Kashmir. So laying garden in Kashmir was one of the very sort of fondness of these amirs or the Mughal rulers, because whenever Mughal rulers, especially Jahangir, Akbar, after the conquest of Kashmir by Akbar, there was a tradition that the emperor, the nobility, they used to go every summer to Kashmir, where they constructed their own gardens, their own houses, their own rest houses. So that was one part of the architecture development of Kashmir under the Mughals. So there are Wazir Khan. Wazir Khan's buildings are there in Lahore, not here in part of India now. Jafar Khan, Qasim Khan, Muqarrab Khan, they all constructed buildings. Next, please. Because after the construction of building, the emperor used to go there. He used to, get lot of gifts from the nobles whose buildings he used to visit, because construction of building became a sort of fashion. But there are so many influences which are coming from other countries, Iran or Turan. These are the names for the Middle Eastern country, Iran and Turan. But there are obviously a lot of indigenous influences also on the architecture, on the vocabulary of architecture. Like we already know Jharokha Darshan, weaving window. We know the Parchin Kari, which is Prachin work, inlay work, Pietra Dura. We know Chowk or Plaza was common for every city. We know Bangla roof, which comes from Bengal. We know Chabutra, square raised platform. We know Ghadi, that is time. Katehra, that is something outside where the first room when you enter any building. So there are indigenous influences on the vocabulary of the artisans we find, because obviously the contemporary historians tell us whenever any building was started, for instance Taj Mahal, then the artisans from throughout the country, from throughout the empire, they came and they started working. Although construction of Taj Mahal took around 22 years, but actual buildings were completed in 12 years. Next, please, so that we can talk about Taj Mahal. There was also this fashion, there was also these are the sources, you may leave it. There was also the fashion of renaming the cities. For instance, if you study the Indo-Persian sources, the name of Agra is not Agra, it is Akbarabad. Similarly, the name of Delhi, the particular part which is now Old Delhi, it is Shahjahanabad, not actually Delhi. Delhi kept on changing so many names. Next, please. Next, please. Next, please. Next. That's no good for you. Next, please. Yes. So we are looking now at Taj Mahal. So if you could read the caption, it is like this, that Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan built the Taj Mahal. We already know this in Agra as a tribute to his favorite wife. What is unique about Taj Mahal is that it is a tribute to a woman, because we know that even Shah Jahan had many wives, not one, but this kind of love you will not find even in the West, that he was devoted to a wife. It is in memory of wife who died in childbirth in 1631. To tell you the story, that actually wherever Shah Jahan went, he was going from one part of India to other. The Mughal emperors and the nobility was highly mobile, despite the means of communication. Kitna time raha? So despite the means of communication, so he went to Deccan. Actually, the Mughals were fully involved in Deccan. So in Deccan, there is a place where she died. When he was campaigning, she actually died in a city I'll be recalling soon, and she was buried there in that city, Mumtaz Mahal. Her name is not Mumtaz Mahal, her name is Arjuman Banu Begum. Arjuman Banu Begum died, and she was laid to rest in the gardens of Zainabad. And after 6 months, her body was removed from there by Shah Shuja, went and they brought it, and it was placed at a place in Agra. The spot was chosen by Emperor Shah Jahan himself, which actually belonged to Raja Man Singh, but in return for that, That time was Raja Jai Singh. Shah Jahan gave in return similar 4 houses. Actually, it is said that 4 buildings he gave in return, and this place was chosen for construction, and the construction started. So if there is time, then I'll be reading the timeline of the construction of Taj Mahal. How much time is there?
Yes, ma'am, you can continue for 15 minutes more.
Okay. So I'll be reading the timeline of construction so that you'll be asking me some more questions. It was on 17 June 1631 that Mumtaz Mahal, whose original name was Arjuman Banu Begum, and this title of Mumtaz Mahal was given to her by her husband, that is chosen one of the palace. She was daughter of Asaf Khan, whose family came to India during the time of Emperor Akbar from present day Iran, and she died, and she was late to she gave birth to 14th child, and she was buried in the Zainabad garden at Burhanpur. Burhanpur happened to a major city at that particular time, because even today if we take a taxi from Agra and we want to go to Deccan, then we can reach there in 20 hours or so by taxi directly to Burhanpur. So it was considered to be sort of entry point into the Deccani states which Shah Jahan wanted to conquer, because there is one side of Emperor Shah Jahan that is a great builder, but there is another side of Emperor Shah Jahan that is also an aggressor. He started invading Deccan, and simultaneously he started invading Kabul, Kandahar, Central Asia. That's why a lot of money was being spent over there also. But she died in 1631. She was laid to rest at Burhanpur. And then in December 1631, a place was chosen that now she will be buried here temporarily. And this place, this whole area, which is quite big, you can see it, how many hectares it is there, that was taken from Raja Man Singh's successor, Jai Singh. In return, he was given 4 houses in Agra. And then her body was brought from Burhanpur, and it was laid to rest over there. And there was then second burial of Mumtaz Mahal in a small domed building, because the main feature of the Indo-Islamic architecture is dome, which you could see. This is dome, the main dome of Taj Mahal you could see. This is known as Gumbad. So she was laid to rest over here, and every year the emperor used to celebrate her death anniversary, which is death anniversary in Persian or in Urdu is known as Urs. That means meeting her with God. So the Urs was held, in which Shah Jahan used to sit himself. Lot of money was distributed throughout the night. There was recitations from the Holy Quran, and money was distributed to the poor. Food was distributed. So annual Urs used to take place, which all the historians has described. But there is problem that we wanted to know what is the exact chronology of Taj Mahal, how and in how long the Taj Mahal was constructed. Actually, it took quite some time, but actual building was perhaps complete by 1640-41. So how do we know it? Because the main historian who described the each and every part of the building is Abdul Hamid Lahori in Badshah Nama, but he described it when it has been completed. But we wanted to know the various stages of the building. The various stages of building we come to know from the calligraphy of Amanat Khan. There was a scholar whose name is Amanat Khan. His original name was Abdul Haq, who was a son of a calligrapher who studied in the city of Shiraz, and he was younger brother of Mullah Shukrullah Shirazi, who is laying buried in the Chini Ka Roza, whom I introduced you, who was one of the prime ministers of Emperor Shah Jahan. Actually, he was a diwan of Shah Jahan when Shah Jahan was a prince. So, calligrapher, the only person who signed anywhere throughout the building is Amanat Khan Shirazi. And Amanat Khan Shirazi also built a caravan, a house for himself, which is now in Punjab, which has been studied by a well-known scholar, Bagley. So Bagley, by studying the calligraphy of Taj Mahal, he came to the conclusion that it was almost complete by 1640-41, and the officially it was recorded in 1643 various parts of the Taj Mahal that it has been completed. And so it was completed by 1648. But Taj Mahal is one thing. We can see the next. It has got, if you go it on one side there is a mosque also, and on the other side there is also the Mehman Khana. So there is mosque, there is Mehman Khana, and the present study of Abba Koch. The name of the book of the Abba Koch is The Complete Taj Mahal, Abba Koch, in which she argues that actually the Taj Mahal or the Roza Munawwara, its garden where it is constructed, is one of the many gardens of Agra. And she writes that actually the Taj Mahal or the Roza Munawwara, along with the two buildings which are standing there, one is mosque and another along with mosque there is Mehman Khana. But Mehman Khana was not actually the guest house, but it was, the title is Jawab. That means it was to bring sort of arena. What is Karina? Karina means that Shah Jahan wanted that everything should be symmetrical. It should be symmetrical. So in order to give symmetry to the mosque, there is also another building over there. So she has studied the ruined structures on the both side of river Jamna, and she has very well documented this in this work, and to the conclusion that actually the building of Taj Mahal along with its garden, it was part of urban landscape of Mughal Agra. It was core which consisted of bands of gardens lining the river on both sides. At the time of Shah Jahan, Agra was a riverfront city described by poets as a sweet smelling garden with new blossoms. Many of those gardens can be studied, and a few gardens have survived only in part, but only Taj Mahal is monumentalized because it is ideally planned. It is a version of typical Agra garden. So Agra was a city of garden. Similarly, as I said, that Srinagar was also a city of garden. And in fact, later on, Shah Jahan had more admiration for Srinagar because what was there, it was highly suitable. It was highly suitable to make the kind of gardens which Mughals wanted to make, because the garden should be behind or opposite a mountain to give it various layers, the way you can find the Shalimar Bagh. It should have several layers apart from the distinction into four-part garden. So it's very important that entire city was to be developed as and this main Taj Mahal was part of, Taj Mahal's garden or Roza Munawwara's garden was part of the entire city, because city was having similar kind of palatial houses on both the sides of river Jamna. But one question, like we know now, or for now also, that it is Archaeological Survey of India which takes care of the monument, because there are many hazards to not only Taj, other monuments also. It's very expensive. But similarly, we should be happy to know that even Shah Jahan was concerned that how the expenses of Roza Munawwara are going to be met. So what, firstly, let us see how much cost it cost. The cost of construction of entire complex. Complex means Taj Mahal, Roza Munawwara. Complex means the mosque. Complex means the Mehman Khana. Complex means actually the garden also. And also complex means this hause or this pool which you could see. So how much it was? In 1631, it is written that it was between 20 to 40 lakhs of rupees. But at the end, how much it cost was only 50 lakhs of rupees. It sounds only now But for that time, it was not only because Dutch East India Company, which has already arrived in India, was earning 3 rupees a month, and a Mughal Mansabdar with a Zat was getting only 750 rupees a month. So 50 lakhs was quite a sum. But I feel very sorry when I also studies Shah Jahan's aggression to conquer Central Asia, because there is continuous claim in his history that Kabul, Kandahar are our ancestral lands. All Mughals continue to claim these are our central, are our ancestral lands, and he sent armies for the conquest of Central Asia, that is Balkh mainly and Badakhshan. And we are very sorry to say that rupees 2 crores were spent on the Balkh campaign, which was nothing but disaster. And the end, only thing we can say that it was for the first time that Indian armies crossed Hindu Kush. But I always imagine that if similar amount would have been spent in construction of some other monument, how rich we would have been today. But he was much concerned. So what he did, for the upkeep of this complex, Shah Jahan established an endowment. Endowment is known as Waqf. And how much was the Waqf? Waqf was of 3 lakhs of rupees. 1/3 came from the annual revenues from 30 villages of the district of Agra, and the other 2/3 came from the income of bazaars and Karwansarai, which formed the southern part of the Taj Mahal. So there were markets also, and there were also Karwansarai. Karwansarai means rest house, because Agra was not only royal court, royal capital, but Agra was also a very important place because it was center of trade and commerce also. Some very expensive kind of brocade and other clothes were being produced there. And nearby Bayana was a center of production of indigo. So the merchants used to come, as we know, the European merchant Pelsart spent several years, more than 15 or 20 years, and wrote an account of Agra. He wanted to buy indigo from Bayana because this is the time when there is 17th century expansion of trade is also taking place. So there were Karwansarai, not one but several Karwansarai. So income from the Karwansarai, which belonged to Taj Mahal or Roza-e Munawwara, which means the sacred tomb, was supposed to go to for the upkeep of Taj Mahal. In 1691, Aurangzeb ordered the governors of every province to send 2,000 rupees as a standing practice yearly to Khwaja Khidmat Khan. Who is Khwaja Khidmat Khan? The in charge who was taking care of the Roza, whom he had installed as caretaker of the buildings. Just now I told you there used to be caretaker of the buildings. That time also I told you that Chandrabhan Brahman has written in his book Chahat Chaman that he asked Aurangzeb that I have become very old. Now I would like to take the post of caretaker to the tomb or mausoleum of Emperor Shah Jahan. So there were whole family of Khidmat Khan. Khidmat means the servants of the tomb. So Waqf covered all necessary expenses of the building, annual charities, etc. But Waqf was abolished in 1803, and the upkeep of the tomb was taken up by the British directly. So this is the story. And later on, as I told you, that the question of symmetry was very, very important for Shah Jahan. So the Qarina, symmetry is known as Qarina, but if you would have seen Agra, you will find that one thing which shows that the two graves of Empress and Shah Jahan, they are not symmetrical, because Shah Jahan was buried later on after so many years when he died, because she is buried in 631. So next, please, we can see the next now. This is how.
Excuse me, ma'am. Now we have to make it short.
Okay. So the Taj Mahal at the sunrise. I'm reading for you. The opulent domed mausoleum. Dome is very important. I told you that the dome or gumbad, the idea also comes. The earliest dome we find is rock dome of rock in Jerusalem, present-day Palestine. So this is a domed mausoleum which stands in formal walled garden. Chahar Bagh is generally regarded as the finest example of Mughal art and architecture. It includes 4 minarets, each more than 13 stories tall. Next, please, 2 more slides and then I'll end. Yes, and just now I said there are 2 subsidiary buildings standing next to each other. One is the Taj Mahal complex, also includes a red sandstone mosque, part of which is visible here, and an assembly hall. There are also smaller mausoleums of other wives of Shah Jahan. Next, please. The Indian poet, now I'm ending it here. The Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore called the Taj Mahal a teardrop on the cheek of time. The main mausoleum took Shah Jahan's workers more than 15 years to complete. The emperor and his beloved wife Mumtaz Mahal are both entombed here, the teardrop on the cheek of time. Thank you. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, this is Emperor Shah Jahan's photo. You can see it. Okay. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. This was really all engaging and engaging. And we have some questions, ma'am.
Sure.
Amita David.
Yes.
Along with cemetery, did the architects refer to Vastu also while constructing the monuments? Vastu.
Vastu Kala, that is, she's asking art of architecture.
No. Vastu Shastra.
Vastu Shastra.
Yes.
There is no reference to it. Actually, the problem with the Mughals was that they never talk about any theory of architecture. Scholars who are studying various monuments, for instance, Taj Mahal, they find some instances of Vastu, but it's not written. There is no theory. Actually, their buildings are themselves. So there is no mention of any theory.
And GROI wants to know something about the Black Taj Mahal, its significance.
Yeah, that's right. Very good. Actually, some because European people or European travelers, perhaps Manrique or somebody, they have written something that Shah Jahan wanted to have black marble, this thing for himself, mausoleum. But the historians nowhere they say that he wanted to have mausoleum. Maybe in 58 he was imprisoned. He was imprisoned by his son Aurangzeb, and he was actually planning that he's going to rule for 50 years, but he actually ruled for 30 years. So even if he would have thought, nobody has written about it. It's all speculation. Although if you go and see the other side of Jamna, another garden has been discovered. Maybe he would have thought that I'll be having my own mausoleum on the other side of river Jamna. But there is no written evidence. Speculation is there.
Inder Mukherjee wants to know that the book Last Frontier by Howard was it an first attempt to protest against the process. I don't know what is the process. But, he wants to know about the book The Last Frontier by Howard.
Howard? Who is Howard?
Okay.
I do not know.
Okay, no problem. So that's all. We have other many more questions, but
Yes, you go. You go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay, I think we have covered the questions. I cannot find. Okay, one more. Oh, there is a question. Prahlad Kumar Kaur. He wants to know: is it true that the hands of the chief architect were cut?
Never ever, never ever. Actually, it's not the only building. So many buildings were constructed. Why he could do such a thing? Never ever. There's nothing like this ever happened. And even scholars who have been studying about these buildings, they are using European sources, they are using Persian sources, and there are also references to the Mughal emperors in the sources of the Middle East. There is no evidence like this. How come it can happen? It was such a long process, and not a single artist were involved. So many artisans, so many architects, teams were involved. If you would have done it, somewhere some evidence would have been there. It is something like a rumor, because so many rumors are there with Shah Jahan.
Okay, so we are running late actually, ma'am. So from the entire department and from Sripat Singh College, I extend my regards to you, and we will be waiting to listen again and again in future. And very thank you to you have given your consent, your kind consent, and accepted our invitation again. Thank you, ma'am.
I feel privileged. Thanks. Thank you for listening to me.
So I hope participants, you have enjoyed the entire session, technical session 5, and now it is the time to give a vote of thanks. And I would invite my dear colleague Somnath Bhattacharya to give the vote of thanks. Somnath da?
Thank you, Emily. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Now we come to the last phase of today's program schedule, and that is Thanksgiving ceremony. On behalf of both organizing colleges, Sripat Singh College and Jangipur College, I offer my heartfelt regards and thanks to all who made this event a success. First, I would like to thank today's research persons and respected speakers, Professor Rajkumar Basu from University of Calcutta, Professor Vishal Khan, Madam, from Aligarh University. They devoted their valuable time to us and enlightened us by their nice, thought-provoking lecture. Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam. I would like to thank respected principal, sir, Sripat Singh College, Dr. Samsud Ahmed. He always spreads his helping hand and encourages us to organize such events. Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank Dr. Navakumar Ghosh, TIC, Jangipur College.
Thank you.
He is one of the patrons of this 7 days lecture series. Thank you. I'd like to thank IQSE coordinators of both Sripat Singh College and Jangipur College. I would like to thank conveners of this web lecture series, Sri Sagar Shimlandi, our leader, captain of the ship, HOD and assistant professor, Department of History, Sripat Singh College, Sri Krishab Chandra Ghosh, old friend of mine, HOD, assistant professor, Department of History, Jangipur College, Dr. Shormila Dattavanik, my colleague, assistant professor, Department of History, Sripat Singh College. I'd like to thank organizing secretaries, Sri Shapan Kumar Sarkar, my colleague, assistant professor, Department of History, Sripat Singh College, Nishikanta Mandal, assistant professor, Department of History, Jangipur College, Emily Rumi, my colleague, assistant professor, Department of History, Sripat Singh College. I also thanking other organizer members, Sri Sujan Kumar Das, TCS and assistant professor, Department of Economics, Sripat Singh College, Sushantu Bishwas, assistant professor, Department of History, Jangipur College, Dolan Chapa Ghosh, teacher in history, Jangipur College. And I like to thank all my fellow colleagues, dignitaries, and all the participants from the various parts of India and abroad, and of course our beloved students who patiently stay with us for last 5 days. And last but not the least, I would like to thank our technical team, Mr. Moloy, Mr. Sujan, Mr. Shubhankar. You are amazing people. Your amazing skill made this program smooth and uninterrupted. Thank you so much. Thanking all once again. That's all from me. Over to Emily Rumi. Thank you.
Thank you, Somnatha. So this was the end of our technical session 5, and I hope today's two deliberations have added a new dimension to our lecture series and workshop, and we are achieving a lot. And for tomorrow, in our technical session 6, we will have another two academician, Professor Pradeep Kumar Datta from Jawaharlal Nehru University and Professor Anil Kumar Sarkar from the University of Kolani. And we will be starting at 3 sharp, and please join before 15 minutes. And I would mention what our HOD has already mentioned, that for some technical glitches or technical burdens, we are not able to give the attendance sheet in the WhatsApp group, and rather we would give it in the YouTube chat box every day during the session. So please follow the instruction. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So recording
Recording off করো।
রেকর্ডিং চলছে।
ended. Shubhankar end করেছেন কেউ জানো?